that point about AI regulation, President Biden is scheduled to meet later today with some consumer advocates who you've worked for
Hmm.
before. You've worked with before, Tristan Harris, Jim Steyer, and others. I wanted to ask you, I mean, what should be the top priorities for the Biden administration as they start to think about AI regulation?
I know about that meeting. Unfortunately in Europe right now, so life is about choices and prior commitments. I think one of the major things we need to look at in terms of the risks of these AI systems is there are short-term, high probability harms, and there are longer-term, potentially higher magnitude harms, but with ambiguous probabilities, right? So we're spending a lot of time right now talking about hypothetical existential risks. So this is things like, the AIs are going to wake up and come after us. And when we have very short term, very high probability risks like information operations, we already struggle with the role that social media has in our information environment. Once we have generative AIs, a big part about how misinformation works is truth has to exist in a very narrow corridor. There's one consensus reality. Misinformation gets to play across the entire continuum of the information, entire information continuum. So they can have, you can put an idea out there and it is exactly the catnip that like resonates with some bias you have in your brain. When you move on to having large language models, that AI can now produce 10,000 variants, 100,000 variants, and find exactly the thing that is going to go most viral. And that's a really serious problem. One of the major ways that we caught information operations at Facebook was by looking at repetition. Like the same messages are being shared over and over again from the same sources. In a world where you can have way more variation, a lot of those tools go away. And that doesn't mean that we don't have options. One of the major projects I worked on at Facebook was something around influence modeling, like the idea that real humans have relationships with each other, that we influence each other. And you can actually pick that out in the data. I write about it in the book. It's very, very hard to fake that kind of data, to fake real human long-term interactions in a way that doesn't stand out for being an aberration. The thing, though, is tech companies don't have incentives for using technology like that. Every fake user you take off your platform makes your company slightly less valuable because you have fewer users. And so the thing I hope that panel will talk about is we need to not sit in paralyzed fear. We need to be acting to make sure that we put in place incentives that encourage positive uses of these technology and decrease the chance that these major problems like labor force displacement happen in the short term.